All right, welcome back, everyone. Uh, in the last video, we managed to get all of our data displaying very nicely. The issue that we're having is that all of these API requests for each individual Pokemon is occurring on the client side. We'd like to handle that from our server side. That way we don't put that burden on the client to make all those requests, and it just simplifies the whole thing quite a bit more. It's just good practice. There's quite a few reasons why you would want to have your external API calls done from your internal server. Often you'll be working with APIs that require API keys. There's other reasons as well that we don't need to get too deep into, but let's just say it's good practice to have your external API calls being done on your server rather than from the client side. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to use something called route handling. Route handlers, we can essentially create our internal API with the app router. So inside of app, we create a folder called API. And then we can create more folders. It's sort of like the page.tsx thing, except it'll be called route.js, or actually we're going to call it route.ts because we're using TypeScript. However, I want to actually make another folder inside of here, and we'll call it get Pokemon. And then inside of that, I'm going to create a file called route.ts. And this will dictate which URL you'll have to go to. If you do it at the top level, you just go to your localhost 3000/API, but this will be localhost/3000 or localhost 3000/API/get Pokemon, and that will be where our route is. And we can see some examples here. I'm going to just use this basic get request format here. So this is what it kind of looks like, and this is just a template from the website, but I'm going to clean this up a little bit here. I'm going to get rid of, so the request, if I need access to the search parameters, I want to keep this. I'll leave it in for now. I don't need it right now, so I'll just leave this stuff in just in case in the future I want to actually have my own get parameters that I send with the request. Maybe I want to access specific Pokemon or something like that. But for now, I'm not going to use that. I'm just going to delete all of this stuff. And this is my response JSON here. So in the response, I'm going to put just data, hello, something like that. And this is the JSON that's going to be returned when I access my API. So now if I go back over to here, so I have my localhost 3000. I'm going to leave this open, but I'm going to create a new tab for right here, and we'll do localhost 3000/API/get Pokemon. And there's our data hello. We get it like that. So the idea is we're going to return all of that JSON data that we were accessing before, but we're going to handle all that stuff in here instead of in page.tsx. So right now we have page.tsx fetching everything, fetching all Pokemon, and then fetching all Pokemon details. We're going to do all of this inside of our API call instead. So we need to import both of these functions. And because this is one of the huge benefits, if you've ever done any web development where you're creating your backend and frontend, it's very uncommon to be able to do both of those in the same system. So it's very cool that we can create our API and have access to the same functions, the same types, all the same stuff that we're working with on both the front end and the back end. So I have access to all my resource functions here from my API. So here I'm going to import those two functions. I'm just going to type Pokemon. It'll figure it out. Fetch all Pokemon and fetch all Pokemon details. So I have those two functions that I created. Let's go ahead and maximize this so we can see better. So the fetch all Pokemon, that's the first one I'm going to run. So first thing I'm going to do is we're going to fetch all the Pokemon. And then we're going to fetch the details for all Pokemon. and then we're going to return it. So I'm just kind of making a little plan here for how I want to do this. So the way I'm going to do this is we're going to go const R. Now, by default, this is an asynchronous function, which means we could do all the awaiting and everything else. We don't have to do the .then notation that we were doing before. We can just await the data to return. So we'll say const fetch Pokemon response equals fetch all Pokemon. Actually, we don't even have to do the response. That's right. So we're just going to make this all Pokemon equals fetch all Pokemon. Now this is going to return, I'm trying to remember what this, so this actually returns the data results, and then the data results can be passed into the fetch all Pokemon details. So now let's go back here. And we want to await this because remember this returns a promise since it's an asynchronous function. So we're going to await those results. And then we'll say const all Pokemon details equals await fetch all Pokemon details. And we're going to pass in our all Pokemon here. And that's what we're going to return here. So we're just going to return all Pokemon details. And this will format it into a nice handy JSON here. So this might take a minute, but let's see how long it takes. It should be a little bit faster, hopefully, than when we did it from the front end. If I go back to here and I refresh, okay, it's loading. So it's trying to load all the, there we go. Look at that. And it's already formatted exactly how we want it to be. So everything is set up perfectly for us. Oh, this is exactly what's returned by this function. But now we're doing it from an API. So we're doing it from our internal API, which means that all of this traffic, if I look at my network traffic, it actually doesn't show these API calls, which is very nice. All the API calls are being done from our Node.js server. So now if we go back to page.tsx, so in page.tsx, we're going to, instead of doing all this, we don't even need all this stuff anymore. We can take this out, and we can take this out. And instead of doing this fetch here, we're going to do fetch. And the URL we're going to fetch from is /API/get Pokemon, and then .then. And it's just going to be the same exact stuff from there on out. So I'm going to actually delete everything from here. And it says our response is not assignable. Oh, okay. So we need to first do .then and then handle. So sorry, hold on a second. I'll clean this up. So the first thing we need to do is we need to do from here, we need to do r.json. And then we need to do .then again with the JSON data that's being returned. And then we can assign that. We can say set Pokemon detail array to data. There we go. So essentially, we can empty this out. This is only going to run on the initial load. But we're going to be fetching from our internal API. When we get the response, after the response arrives, it's going to run. It's going to take the response and get the JSON data, which also takes time to parse the JSON data, and then another .then with the JSON data, it's going to be set to the Pokemon detail array. So I could create a separate function to do all this. It probably isn't a terrible idea to do that. But this is pretty readable to me. If this causes issues for you, you could create another function in here that's fetching from our internal API. And I don't think that's a terrible idea either. So we can also take this stuff out now. We don't need this anymore. It's a good chance to clean up some of this stuff that we're not using. Visual Studio Code tells us that we're not using it. So, hey, let's get rid of it. Now, if I save this and everything's working how it should be, when I go back to my main page here, first thing I'm going to do is show you the network traffic. and I'm going to refresh. You can see that it's pending, it's fetching from our internal API, and it happened. So that was really fast. It actually happened very, very quickly compared to before. Much better to be running this from the server rather than from the front end. It's a lot less requests. As you can see, they still have to make requests for each of these images, but that goes pretty quickly with the image size being small. Anyway, we've basically adapted our calls to that external API to be done from our internal API. We created an API route, and then we're accessing that route here. We can also access that route directly in the browser, which we did over here. We could just so we could see what we get by doing API/get Pokemon. This is the relative path to it. So right now I could type localhost 3000, but what happens when I deploy my website? It's not going to be at localhost 3000. It's going to be at whatever URL I deploy it to, and then it's not going to work anymore. So I want to make sure I'm using relative pathing here to my internal API. I get the data, set it to the array, and I was actually expecting to run into more issues in that. It was next.js makes the process so easy that we were able to adapt this front end call to the back end very, very quickly and very effectively. So I hope this shows the power of Next.js and at the app router and the power of using an internal API to make calls to an external API. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.